Hi all, we're going to be reading from Carl Jung's Psychological Types again, and the definition today is individuation. Very, very interesting topic and really helpful to think about the concepts that are going to be discussed. Individuation. The concept of individuation plays no small role in our psychology. In general, it is the process of forming and specializing the individual nature. In particular, it is the development of the psychological individual as a differentiated being from the general collective psychology. Individuation, therefore, is a process of differentiation, having for its goal the development of the individual personality. Okay, so he's making the distinction between the collective psychology, you might call it societal standards, but there'll be other things involved in there as well, like the collective unconscious, for example, and the actual individual psychology of the person. Individuation is to this extent a natural necessity, inasmuch as its hindrance by an extensive or actually exclusive levelling to collective standards involves a definite injury to individual vital activity. There's a big debate at the minute going on about individuality over collectivity. Yeah, collectivity. I'm not sure if I'm getting the words totally right, but in political spheres, we tend to regard the left as being more collective and the right as being more individualistic. So a really clear example of that is gun laws, for example. The left tends to say only the police and the armed forces should have guns, and the right tend to say actually it's an individual right to be able to protect oneself and therefore have guns. There's more of a discussion in America because they actually have guns over there, but that's probably a clear example. So the left would tend to place the good of society as a whole above the good of the individual. But individuality, both physically and physiologically, is already given. Hence, it also expresses itself psychologically. An essential check to the individuality, therefore, involves an artificial mutilation. It is at once clear that a social group consisting of deformed individuals cannot for long be a healthy and prosperous institution, since only that society which can preserve its internal union and its collective values, while at the same time granting the greatest possible freedom to the individual, has any prospect of enduring vitality. Since the individual is not only a single separate being, but by his very existence also presupposes a collective relationship, the process of individuation must clearly lead to a more intensive and universal collective solidarity, and not to mere isolation. If we all just went round, in a very sort of trite and crude analogy, but if we only went round thinking about ourselves and our individuality, actually the freedom to do that would be eventually removed from us, arguably, because we live in a relatively free society where we are free to be individuals to quite a large extent, but you can't then poo-poo the society that has upheld those freedoms for you, even though people would make the argument of, well, you have inherent natural rights, so society can never take those rights away from you. It doesn't have the right to because they're God-given rights. That is true, but in reality, society can take those rights away from you, and you might not necessarily even understand what those God-given rights are were it not for a free and liberal society where intellectual thought exists and books are written and we have access to sources of information and we can all become educated. The psychological process of individuation is clearly bound up with the so-called transcendent function, since it alone can provide that individual line of development which would be quite unattainable upon the ways dictated by the collective norm. The transcendent function is more commonly known as the third function or the tertiary function. So, for example, I'll just use an MBTI example. If you had an INFJ, you would see the introverted intuition as the dominant function, the extroverted feeling as the auxiliary function, which helps to balance out the dominant. The auxiliary, according to Carl Jung, is either partially conscious or unconscious. And then the tertiary function, which is relatively unconscious, and it's transcendent because it provides a way of mediating between the dominant function and the inferior function, which is the fourth function, pretty much fully unconscious. I'm not sure to what extent you can make that function conscious. I'm sure you can. I don't want to say that though, because I'm not sure. So his reasoning is that the transcendent function, aka the tertiary function, it comes in and it turns the whole function stack on its head. So where you would normally have introverted intuition at the top, the transcendent function, that function is able to facilitate the access into the fourth function of the individual. When that would happen, I guess, would be out of necessity. I want to use the example of if you just really needed to win an argument and the need to win the argument was so important to you that you chose to abandon your usual sense of rationalizing or passing out an argument or persuading, and instead you resorted to a function that wasn't very conscious in a way of winning that person over, kind of like a final attempt. So I may be way off here, but for example, if I was arguing with my significant other about what I think happened versus what he thinks happened, and I was making my case, I might be using my introverted intuition as an INFJ to kind of paint a picture. I've got a certain amount of factual information and then I'm filling in the blanks and making connections and showing him the story that I've created in my mind, and I'm persuading him that way, while at the same time using my extroverted feeling to realize that bombarding him with my story isn't necessarily a good way of winning him over. So my creation of the story, or my giving my side of the argument, would be tempered with being tuned into what's acceptable, being kind of aware of how susceptible to my very detailed NI people are. So I'm kind of putting it through this socially acceptable filter, then it's more palatable. But then if I ended up getting really frustrated and he still didn't accept my argument, I might then resort to using my lower functions. So the transcendent function, the tertiary function, would come in, and it would work between the NI, the first function, and the SE, the fourth function, to further develop that story in ways that I wouldn't normally do. And the tool I would use would be the third function, which would be introverted thinking. So it might look like I've gone from describing my account or my version of events in a kind of storytelling intuition way, where I've filled in the blanks, whilst also considering his feelings. I might now bombard him with logic because FE's gone out of the window, and I attempt to, instead of painting these mental landscapes and trying to present those to him, I might turn around and go, right, well, you said this. This is what you said. This is what I observed you saying. Are you denying that? So I start pointing out all the SE things, the things that literally happened, the details of what happened. But of course, it's an inferior function, so I probably haven't got many of those details. And I'm probably presenting those details in a way that has like a subtext to it. Like, well, you said this, so this must mean this. But I won't say this must mean this. I'll just say you said this, you said this, you did this. He argues, I just use cold, hard logic. Well, if you said that, then how can you? If-then statements. I start using if-then statements, which is like the thinking process. Well, if you said this, then this. If you said this, then this. And that's not my usual way of arguing. It's quite a cold, bulldozing way of doing it. It's a lot more unconscious than my usual way, and it's void of any sort of, it's not being tempered really. So it's almost like you turn your personality on its head. You have your function stack turned on its head, but you're actually very inept at using what is now the top function and the transcendent function, which you could say becomes an auxiliary of sorts. It's that one is more conscious than the now top function. So it doesn't work very well, or maybe it's kind of immoral in a way to resort to that instead of just walking away after you've realized that you can't win that argument. I might be totally off on this, but that's kind of what I deduce from that. But yeah, anyway, back to what we were talking about. I will do a separate video on the transcendent function after I've thought about it a bit more, because that is a very, very interesting topic as well. Okay, so the psychological process of individuation is clearly bound up with the so-called transcendent function, since it alone can provide that individual line of development, which would be quite unattainable upon the ways dictated by the collective norm. Yeah, okay, very quickly then. So going back to the collective norm. So if I'm finding it really hard to be adjusted to a particular societal standard, and I've tried all my usual ways using my top functions, all right, and I just can't quite do it, I may resort to using the transcendent function as a tool to assist the fourth function. For example, if I am a messy INFJ, right, my FE might make me tidy up if somebody's coming round and they're going to see my house. Well, it will, in fact. However, am I going to keep up to those standards on my own? And I might feel bad about living in a messy house, and I really do want to tidy it, but I just can't I don't see the point. I can't find the motivation. So my thinking, my third function, might kick in and go, okay, if you tidy your room it means that you no longer have to worry about tidying your room. And then I'm able to kind of look around and see what needs doing and efficiently perform that task based on a very unconscious SI that's kind of trying to come through at that point, because the TI has rationalized why I should focus on SE stuff, or, you know, seeing what's in my environment, responding to my environment. The SE is more just seeing what's in the environment, then choosing to perform the actions that I see need doing, because I'm looking at it through SI rather than NI, which tends to just see things other than I need to tidy up. Okay. So the transcendent function could come in and maybe save the day and help you to achieve where you're failing. But it's making the case here for specifically in the you can't get up to scratch in terms of the collective norm via your top functions, but you maybe can do that by using the transcendent function to tap into the unconscious function or the inferior. Under no circumstance can individuation be the unique goal of psychological education. Before individuation can be taken for a goal, the educational aim of adaptation to the necessary minimum of collective standards must first be attained. A plant which is to be brought to the fullest possible unfolding of its particular character must first be able to grow in the soil wherein it is planted. This is what I wanted to talk about. I have found this a very freeing idea. So if I went to Jung for psychotherapy, right, and I said, you know what, I'm so maladapted, I can't fit into society, I can't keep my house tidy, I can't hold a job down, and I'm a bad person, and, you know, I kind of feel like I have all these special ideas, and I want everybody to listen to my ideas, but they won't listen, and I can't make moves, and I have to kind of live in the shadows because nobody understands me. He might very well turn around and say, okay, well, first of all, what you've got to do is you have to adhere to a base minimum of collective norms before we can go any further. And then, you know, I'd be like, but I don't fit into society, and I don't want to fit into society. And he would say, well, you're saying that because you're justifying the fact that you don't fit into society. And there is a part of you that wants to be an individual, and that's very important. But before we can even start to tap into what that might be, you first have to adhere to these collective norms. And it's almost like the idea of, for you to level up and actually become fully realized as an individual, you first have to be in right standing with society. And it's such a pertinent idea. You know, how many times you'll come across people who are kind of, you know, they're creative, they're kind of wild, they're different, you know, they've got different ideas, you know, I'm an individual, you know, and then you find out that they've committed like a heinous crime, or they've abused somebody, or they're a thief, or and it kind of leaves a sour taste in your mouth. Like, you get that with celebrities, you know, celebrities who we really admire, and then we find out that they've done a Me Too on somebody, and you're kind of like, I don't think I like that celebrity anymore. And it's because for you to have a place as an individual, it has to be in the context of you being in right standing with society. And that's not the same as fitting in. You don't have to fit in terms of you have to throw all your beliefs out of the window and all your individualism and just, toe the line and be a complete sheep. It's not about that. It's about, can you, in good conscience, stand in front of society and defend your actions? Okay, so if you've decided something that goes against societal norms, and you're fully willing to stand up in front of anybody who questions you and give an account of why you've chosen that path, that's an honourable thing to do. That doesn't mean you're not in right standing with society. You've gone against a collective norm there, but you stand by that decision and you have integrity over it. Having integrity is being in right standing with society, okay? But if you've done something like, you've stolen, and then you've kind of, had a change of heart, I wish I hadn't have done that, I regret doing that. But then you're kind of out there preaching to people about how they should live, or you're trying to say that, hey, look at me, I've changed. Yet you're not admitting to that crime that you committed, and you're not making it right with that person. You're a total hypocrite. It's about hypocrisy, and it's going to hurt you. It's going to harm you. You're going to have an internal struggle with guilt and cognitive dissonance, and you're not going to be able to come in an individual in the sense of becoming one out of something healthy. You might become an individual, but it's going to be off of the back of, well, I just want to separate myself from society because they don't understand me, and I, if I ever do get caught for doing this thing, then I can just say it's because I'm so different, or I'm traumatized, or whatever it is. Like that's one of the new things. That's a good example, well, I was like this because I had a bad childhood. And it's like, well, really sorry about that. It's very bad that happened to you. But if you don't bring yourself into good standing with society, you are going to continue to suffer, basically. It's not about condemning people. It's about recognizing that you have to have a baseline of societal adherence. And I really recognize that, because I've teetered back and forth, and it's when I'm not really feeling good about myself, or when something's going wrong, I'll become more rebellious towards society than I normally would be. Oh, they just don't understand me, or, I'm whatever, more whatever, I don't know. I don't even want to say it, but I look down on people, and look down on people for being part of this collective, because they're the ones fitting in and I'm on the fringes, And actually, as I've got older, fitting in with people, not showing them everything about myself, but fitting in with people, trying to be useful, not needing to show off who I am to everybody, as if they all need to understand me. Towing the social line a little bit. Towing the moral line a little bit. Obeying laws. Like, there might be an argument for a law being completely ridiculous. Can I, in good faith, stand there and give an account as to why I broke that law? Is it going to be, an honourable decision that I made? Or is it just going to be because I just wanted to, because I felt like it? That's not really an honourable reason, So it's not about adhering to society at the expense of your own integrity. It's about, if you're not adhering to society, that is only valid if the reasons for that are full of integrity. I feel very convicted on this. It's made me think about changes that I need to make, um, and why I might be stuck in certain ways. Um, and I have the tendency to go after lofty ideas whilst ignoring the small stuff. And actually, if I cleared up that small stuff first, the shallow stuff that doesn't matter, and it actually does. And there's stuff in the Bible that talks about this as well. There's one passage where it says God will trust you with a lot only when he can trust you with a little. He'll allow you to realize your full individuality as long as you've made amends to the people you've harmed first. And there's that other verse as well: before you bring your gift to the altar of God to offer him your offering, first go and make amends with your brother. Like, that's the important thing. It has to be done in the right order. And the other passage in Psalms about, if you're a man of God, you must also be blameless in the eyes of society, and righteous, and do your brother no harm. That is not the same as when Jesus said you have to go against the norm sometimes. It's not to be confused with that. There's a time and a place for both. Jesus went against societal norms, we know that, but he could stand there and give an account as to why. It wasn't just because he felt like it, because he was being such an individual. No, it was because that was the right thing to do, okay? That's not the same as going against norms because you want to for your own selfish ends. All right. A lot of food for thought there. I really love this topic. So Jung recognized that in order for the psyche to be healthy, and in order to start the progression into the healthy individualism, you first had to lay the foundation for that, which was to meet certain societal norms, or have a bloody good reason why you weren't doing that. But not just because, well, I'm an introverted intuitive and I'm just so different, man. And not healthy for the individual. It doesn't feel good to be like that, to be quite honest. Individuation always finds itself more or less in opposite to the collective norm, since it means a separation and differentiation from the general, and a building up of the particular, not, however, a particularity especially sought, but one with an a priori foundation in the psyche. So it's like you're born with your individualism, or seeds of individualism. So that is, it's like the real you without societal influences, although everybody has the collective unconscious, and you have the ideas that are kind of primordial. So it arguably does come from society as well. It all feeds into each other. The opposition to the collective norm, however, is only apparent since on closer examination the individual standpoint is found to be differently orientated but not antagonistic to the collective norm. So your sense of being an individual, it's different to the collective norm, but it's not antagonistic to it. The individual way can never be actually opposed to the collective norm, because the opposite to the latter could only be a contrary norm. But the individual way is never a norm. A norm arises out of the totality of individual ways, and can have a right to existence and a beneficial effect only when individual ways, which from time to time have a need to orientate to a norm, are already in existence. A norm serves no purpose when it possesses absolute validity. An actual conflict with the collective norm takes place only when an individual way is raised to a norm, which, moreover, is the fundamental aim of extreme individualism. Yeah, so if you're being an extremist in your individualism, you are actually trying to turn that individualism into a norm, so it's no longer going to be an individualism. Such a purpose is, of course, pathological and entirely opposed to life. It has, accordingly, nothing to do with individuation, which, though certainly concerned with the individual bypath, precisely on that account also needs the norm for its orientation towards society, and for the vitally necessary solidarity of the individual with society. Hence, individuation leads to a natural appreciation of the collective norm, whereas to an exclusively collective orientation of life, the norm becomes increasingly superfluous, whereupon real morality goes to pieces. The more completely a man's life is moulded and shaped by the collective norm, the greater is his individual immorality. Yeah, so on the other end of that, don't get sucked in to collective norms. Individuation leads to a natural appreciation. Okay, so you have base level norms, get in right standing with society. Doesn't say you have to conform to a bunch of stuff, just get in right standing, okay? Make amends, pay money back, give apologies. Just make things right with your brother as much as you can. If you're breaking any laws, stop breaking the laws unless you have a really good reason to do so. And, you know, a reason that comes from integrity. I feel just convicted today. And then your individuation can come in and grow. Then you can become a real individual, you know. And then you will appreciate societal norms, but you won't get sucked in by them. So actually, the way of not being a sheep is to, first of all, make sure you are adhering to some base level societal norms, being in good standing, being blameless in society, then the individuation, and then you will have the ability to not get sucked in, because you'll see people who are maladaptive, okay, and they're not in right standing with society, trying to be individuals, and they tend to get sucked in to all kinds of ideologies, collective kind of fringe ideologies, and ironically their thinking and belief systems are commandeered by other people or by these ideologies, because they don't have real individualism, which was grown out of being in right standing with society. So ironically, those people who think that they're very, very individualistic and everybody else is a sheep may well be the sheep themselves without knowing it. Individuation is practically the same as the development of consciousness out of the original state of identity. Hence, it signifies an extension of the sphere of consciousness, an enriching of the conscious psychological life. That's the end of that chapter. Absolutely loved that. And so, I mean, what can you do? What can you start to put into place to get you into better standing with society, you know? Do you have any amends to make? Do you need to stop breaking a law? And again, I have to keep reiterating, it's not that you should always do what society demands of you. It's not about that. But you have to know your reasons for not doing it and be able to give an account as to why. You know, if anyone hypothetically asked you to do that, So even if you were breaking a law, you know why you're breaking that law. You've made a moral decision based on integrity, and only then can your individualism be completely realized in a healthy way. And Carl Jung's saying you're actually not going to get sucked in to collective norms, because, you know, if you do, then that's a bad thing as well. But it's getting that balance. And I really like the idea of, before you go after these lofty ideas that are individual to you, just make sure that your life is cleaned up, you know. Maybe with the help of the Transcendent Function. I can't wait to do a video about that, because that is really, really interesting. Let me know your thoughts. Okay, till next time.